The dust had been her companion for so long that Violet Jennings no longer remembered what it felt like to walk on ground that did not crack beneath her bare feet. And when the mountain man first saw her stumbling across the trading post yard in 1878, he stopped mid-stride and stared at the bloodied soles that left crimson prints in the dirt. Fletcher Townsend had come down from his cabin in the LaSalle Mountains with a load of pelts to trade, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of winter furs like they weighed nothing at all. His hair hung past his collar, dark brown and slightly wavy from months without a proper cut, and his muscular frame filled out his buckskin shirt in a way that made women glance twice before looking away. He had planned to conduct his business quickly and return to the solitude of the high country, but the sight of this woman, thin as a willow branch and walking barefoot across the harsh Utah terrain, made him forget about pelts and provisions entirely. Violet did not notice him watching. She had learned long ago to keep her eyes down, to make herself small, to move through the world as quietly as possible. Her dress, if it could be called that, was little more than patched cotton held together with determination and thread. Her blonde hair hung in a braid down her back, the color of wheat just before harvest, and her face bore the kind of weariness that came from years of struggle rather than age. She could not have been more than 22, but her eyes held decades of hardship. She had walked 3 miles from the small homestead, where she worked as an unpaid servant for a family that had taken her in after her parents died of fever 6 years earlier. The arrangement had been simple at first: room and board in exchange for help with the children and the household. But room and board had gradually become a thin pallet in a storage shed, and whatever scraps remained after the family had eaten. Shoes had never been part of the bargain. Fletcher watched her approach the trading post, observed the way she hesitated at the steps, clearly calculating whether she could manage them without wincing. Something in his chest tightened, an unfamiliar sensation that had nothing to do with the altitude. He had been alone for 5 years, ever since he left his family's farm in Missouri after his father died, and his brothers made it clear they did not want to split the land for ways. The mountains had welcomed him, asked nothing of him except respect and hard work, and he had built a life of solitary contentment. He trapped beaver and fox, hunted elk and deer, sold what he did not need and kept to himself. In 5 years, he had spoken to perhaps a dozen people beyond basic trading conversations. But when Violet stumbled on the top step and caught herself against the doorframe, leaving a smear of blood from her torn foot, Fletcher moved without thinking. He crossed the yard in 5 long strides, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust, and reached her just as she swayed. "Madam," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended, rusty from disuse. "You are hurt." Violet jerked back, startled, and nearly lost her balance again. Fletcher's hand shot out to steady her, his large palm gentle on her thin arm. She looked up at him then, and he saw her eyes were the color of mountain sage, that silvery green that only existed in the high desert. "I am fine," she said quickly, automatically. "Please, I am sorry. I just need to purchase some flour for the Carver family." Fletcher glanced down at her feet. The right one was bleeding freely now, a deep gash across the ball of her foot where she must have stepped on something sharp. The left was crisscrossed with scars, old injuries healed badly. "You walked here?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "It is not far," Violet said, and tried to pull her arm free from his grip. But Fletcher did not release her, not roughly, just firmly enough that she could not easily escape. "You need those feet tended," he said, "and you need shoes." "I cannot afford shoes," Violet said, and there was no self-pity in her voice, just flat statement of fact. "Now please, I must make my purchase and return before dark." Fletcher looked at her for a long moment. Up close, he could see how truly thin she was, her collarbones sharp beneath the worn fabric of her dress, her wrists delicate as bird bones. Something fierce and protective surged through him, something he had not felt since he used to defend his younger sister from schoolyard bullies back in Missouri. "Wait here," he said, and before she could protest, he had disappeared into the trading post. Violet stood on the porch, her injured foot throbbing, her mind racing. She should leave. She should complete her errand and go back to the Carver homestead before Mrs. Carver decided she had taken too long and withheld her supper. But her foot hurt terribly, and the mountain man had told her to wait, and there had been something in his voice that made disobedience seem impossible. He emerged a few minutes later with the trader, a grizzled man named Silas who had run the Monticello post for 15 years. Silas took one look at Violet's foot and shook his head. "Girl, you are going to get infection walking around like that," he said. "Come inside and sit down." "I cannot," Violet started, but Fletcher had already scooped her up as easily as if she weighed no more than a sack of grain. She gasped, instinctively gripping his shoulders, and felt the solid muscle beneath her hands. He carried her inside and set her gently on a wooden chair near the cold stove. "Silas, you got clean cloth and whiskey?" Fletcher asked. "For drinking or for doctoring?" "Doctoring." While Silas rummaged in the back, Fletcher knelt before Violet's chair. She tried to pull her feet back, embarrassed by their dirty, damaged state, but he caught her ankle with surprising gentleness. "Let me see," he said quietly. Violet had not had anyone touch her with kindness in so long that the simple gesture made her throat tight. She forced herself to remain still as Fletcher examined her foot, his large hands careful and warm. "This needs stitching," he said, looking up at her. "The gash is deep." "I cannot pay for stitching," Violet whispered. "I cannot pay for anything. The Carvers give me no wages, only food and shelter." Fletcher's jaw tightened. "The Carvers, that is the family homestead 3 miles west." "Yes. And they send you walking 3 miles on torn feet to fetch flour." Violet did not answer, which was answer enough. Fletcher stood up, and she saw anger in the set of his shoulders, though his voice remained gentle when he spoke to her. "What is your name?" "Violet Jennings." "Violet," he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like something precious. "I am Fletcher Townsend. I am going to stitch your foot, and then I am going to make you shoes, and then we are going to have a conversation about the Carvers." "You cannot," Violet said, panic rising in her chest. "They will be angry if I do not return soon. They will think I stole their money." "How much did they give you for flour?" 50 cents. Fletcher reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar. "Silas, give her a 50-cent sack of flour to take back. The rest is for the medical supplies." Silas returned with clean cloth, a needle and thread, and a bottle of whiskey. Fletcher poured some of the whiskey on the cloth and looked at Violet seriously. "This is going to hurt," he said. "You can hold onto my shoulder if you need." Violet nodded, bracing herself. When the whiskey touched the open wound, the pain was sharp enough that she could not suppress a small cry. Her hand shot out and gripped Fletcher's shoulder hard enough that her knuckles went white. He worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the wound thoroughly before threading the needle. "You done this before?" Silas asked, watching with interest. "Had to stitch myself up more than once in the high country," Fletcher said. "And I helped the camp doctor during the war." The war. That would have been over a decade ago, which meant Fletcher was likely in his early 30s. Violet watched him work, noting the concentration on his weathered face, the steadiness of his hands. He had a strong nose and a firm mouth, and his eyes were the deep brown of good earth. There was a scar along his left jawline, pale against his tanned skin. He made 6 neat stitches, each one drawing the edges of the wound together cleanly. Violet bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, but she did not cry out again. When he finished, he wrapped her foot in clean cloth and tied it securely. "There," he said, "that will hold. But you cannot be walking 3 miles on it." "I must," Violet said. "I have no choice." Fletcher sat back on his heels and looked at her. "Everyone has choices." "Not when you have nothing," Violet said quietly. "Not when the choice is between a pallet in a shed or sleeping under the stars and starving. I know the Carvers are not kind, but at least I eat most days. At least I have a roof." "What happened to your family?" Violet looked down at her bandaged foot. "Fever took them in the winter of 1872. I was 16. The Carvers said they would take me in, said I could be like a daughter to them. That lasted about a month before I became free labor." Fletcher was silent for a moment, processing this. "You have been with them for 6 years." "Yes." "And in 6 years, they never once gave you shoes?" Violet shook her head. "Mrs. Carver says shoes are a luxury I have not earned." The anger that flashed across Fletcher's face was fierce and bright. He stood abruptly and walked to the corner of the trading post where Silas kept tools and leather goods. He examined several pieces of hide, testing their thickness and flexibility, before selecting 2 prime pieces of supple deerskin. "Fletcher, you planning what I think you are planning?" Silas asked. "I am making her boots," Fletcher said simply. "Tonight and tomorrow I am going to have words with the Carvers." "Fletcher, please," Violet said, alarmed. "You cannot. They will throw me out. Where will I go?" Fletcher turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You will come with me." The words hung in the air between them. Violet stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Come with me?" Fletcher repeated. "Up to my cabin." "It is a good cabin, solid walls, warm in winter. I have more food than I need, and the solitude has been getting old anyway. You can stay as long as you like. No obligations, no expectations. Just a safe place to live until you figure out what you want to do next." "You do not even know me," Violet whispered. "I know you have been walking on torn feet for people who do not value you," Fletcher said. "I know you deserve better than a pallet in a shed. And I know that if you stay with the Carvers, one day you are going to step on something that causes infection, and they are going to let you die rather than pay for a doctor." The terrible thing was that Violet suspected he was right. She had seen the way Mrs. Carver looked at her when she moved too slowly, when she ate too much, when she existed too loudly. She was a burden they tolerated, nothing more. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked. Fletcher knelt before her again, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because 5 years ago, I watched my mother work herself to death on a farm that my father's debts would take from us anyway. I watched her hands bleed from washing clothes in lye water, watched her go without supper so we could eat, watched her fade away day by day. And when she died, I swore that if I ever had the means and the opportunity to help a woman in need, I would do it. I have the means now, Violet, and you are the opportunity." Tears pricked at Violet's eyes. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it," Fletcher said gently. "While I make your boots." He set to work immediately, using Silas's tools and workspace. Violet watched in fascination as he traced her feet on paper, then used the tracings to cut the leather. His hands moved with practiced skill, and she realized he must have made his own boots many times before. "You spend much time alone?" Silas asked Fletcher, clearly trying to make conversation. "Most of my time," Fletcher replied, not looking up from his work. "I prefer the mountains to people, generally speaking." "What made you come down today?" "Needed salt and coffee. Figured I would trade some pelts while I was at it." Silas glanced at Violet with a knowing look. Funny how plans change. Fletcher did not respond, but Violet saw the corner of his mouth quirk slightly. He worked steadily for over an hour, cutting and shaping the leather, stitching the pieces together with the same careful precision he had used on her foot. He created a soft inner lining from rabbit fur he purchased from Sela's, and reinforced the soles with an extra layer of cowhide. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Fletcher held up a pair of boots. They were simple but beautifully made, with careful stitching and a design that would support her feet and protect them from the harsh terrain. "Try them on," he said. Violet slipped her good foot into the left boot. It fit perfectly, snug but not tight, the rabbit fur lining soft against her skin. Fletcher helped her ease the right boot over her bandaged foot, his touch gentle and careful. "How do they feel?" he asked. Violet stood slowly, testing her weight. The boots supported her feet like nothing she had ever worn before, and even with the stitches in her right foot, the pain was significantly less than it had been walking barefoot. "They are perfect," she said, and her voice broke on the last word. "I have never owned anything so fine." Fletcher looked pleased. "They will last you a good long while if you treat them right. I will teach you how to oil the leather to keep it supple." The casual assumption that he would be around to teach her things made Violet's heart skip. She looked at this man who had appeared in her life mere hours ago and turned everything upside down. He had tended her wounds, made her boots with his own hands, and offered her refuge without asking for anything in return. It seemed impossible, too good to be true. "I should get back," she said reluctantly. "It will be dark soon." "I am riding you back," Fletcher said in a tone that brooked no argument. "My horse can carry both of us, and I am not having you walk 3 miles on a stitched foot." He paid Sela's for the supplies and the leather, collected the sack of flour, and then led Violet outside where a large chestnut gelding waited patiently. Fletcher mounted with easy grace, his muscular thighs gripping the horse's sides, then reached down for Violet. "Put your foot in the stirrup and give me your hand," he said. Violet obeyed, and Fletcher lifted her up as if she weighed nothing, settling her sideways in front of him on the saddle. His arm came around her waist to steady her, and she found herself pressed against his broad chest. The heat of him, the solid strength, the scent of leather and pine and clean male sweat, all combined to make her dizzy. "Which way?" Fletcher asked. Violet pointed west, and Fletcher urged the horse forward at a gentle walk. The motion rocked them together, and Violet was intensely aware of every point where their bodies touched. She could feel the steady rhythm of Fletcher's breathing, the occasional shift of his muscles as he guided the horse. "Tell me about the mountains," she said, partly to distract herself from his proximity. "What is it like up there?" Fletcher was quiet for a moment, as if considering how to describe something that meant everything to him. "Peaceful," he said finally. "In summer, the meadows are so full of wildflowers you cannot see the grass. In winter, the snow is deep enough to bury a man, but inside the cabin with the fire going, it is the warmest feeling in the world. There are elk and deer, mountain lions and bears, clear streams full of trout. Air so clean it hurts your lungs the first time you breathe it. Sky so big you feel like you could fall up into it." The poetry in his words surprised her. "It sounds beautiful. It is. But it can be lonely too. 5 years is a long time to spend with only yourself for company." "Why did you stay alone so long?" Fletcher's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Guess I was waiting for a reason to be around people again. Had not found one until today." Violet's breath caught. She turned her head slightly to look at him and found his brown eyes already on her. In the fading light, his face was all strong planes and shadows, and she thought she had never seen a man more handsome or more kind. "You do not know me," she said again, but softer this time. "Then tell me about yourself," Fletcher said. "We have a 3-mile ride. That is time enough to start." So Violet told him. She told him about her childhood on a small farm with parents who loved her, about learning to read from her mother's precious books, about helping her father with the animals and the crops. She told him about the fever that took them both within days of each other, about the terror of being suddenly alone in the world at 16. She told him about the Carvers, about how hope had gradually transformed into endurance, about the small kindnesses she clung to like scraps of warmth in winter. Fletcher listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You deserved better," he said finally. "You deserve better now. I am just grateful to have survived." "Surviving is not the same as living," Fletcher said. "You should be living, Violet." They reached the Carver homestead just as full dark settled over the land. It was a modest house with a barn and a few outbuildings, sitting in a small valley between red rock formations. Lamplight glowed in the windows, and Violet felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Fletcher helped her down from the horse, his hands spanning her waist, and she found herself reluctant to step away from him. "Think about what I said," Fletcher told her quietly. "About coming with me. I will be staying at the trading post tonight and leaving tomorrow afternoon. If you want to come, be there by noon. And if I do not come, then I will respect your choice," Fletcher said. "But I will come back in 2 weeks to check on you, and 2 weeks after that, and 2 weeks after that until I am satisfied you are truly all right." Despite everything, Violet felt herself smile. "You are a stubborn man. When it matters, yes." Fletcher took her hand and pressed something into it. When she looked down, she saw a small leather pouch. "There is $20 in there. If things get bad, if you need to leave suddenly, you use that money to get somewhere safe. Promise me." "Fletcher, I cannot take your money." "You can and you will. Promise me, Violet." The intensity in his voice made her nod. "I promise." "Good." He mounted his horse in one fluid motion, then looked down at her. "Noon tomorrow. I will wait until 2 just in case, but I hope you will come." He turned the horse and rode away into the darkness, and Violet stood in her new boots watching until she could no longer hear the sound of hoofbeats. Then she tucked the leather pouch deep into her dress pocket, picked up the sack of flour, and walked toward the house. Mrs. Carver met her at the door, a thin woman with a pinched face and suspicious eyes. "You took long enough." "I am sorry, madam. There was a wait at the trading post." Mrs. Carver's gaze dropped to Violet's feet and her eyes narrowed. "Where did you get those boots?" Violet's mind raced. "A woman at the trading post saw my feet were injured. She gave them to me out of Christian charity." It was not quite a lie. The boots had been given out of charity, even if the giver had been a man and not a woman. Mrs. Carver looked skeptical but did not press the issue. She snatched the flour sack and examined it, as if checking that Violet had not stolen any. "Get to the shed," she said. "You have missed supper with your dawdling." Violet walked to the small storage shed behind the house where her pallet lay on the dirt floor. Her stomach growled with hunger, but she was used to that. What she was not used to was the warmth in her chest, the flutter of hope that Fletcher had planted there. She lay down on her thin blanket and looked at the rough wooden ceiling. Tomorrow. She had until noon tomorrow to make a choice that would change everything. Stay with the familiar misery of the Carvers, or take a chance on a mountain man she had known for mere hours. But he had made her boots. He had stitched her wounded foot with gentle hands. He had offered her safety without obligation. And when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she had not felt in years. Violet slipped her hand into her pocket and felt the leather pouch there, solid and real. $20. More money than she had ever possessed in her life. Fletcher had given it to her without hesitation, trusting her completely. She thought about the mountains he had described, about wildflower meadows and clean air and sky so big you could fall into it. She thought about his voice when he said her name, rough and warm like sun-heated stone. She thought about the way his arm had felt around her waist, strong and protective. Sleep was a long time coming, but when it finally arrived, Violet dreamed of mountain peaks and leather boots and a man with kind brown eyes. She woke before dawn to the sound of the Carver children crying. Through the thin walls of the shed, she could hear Mrs. Carver scolding them, her voice sharp and impatient. Violet lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of a household that had never felt like home. When the sun rose, she helped with breakfast, fed the chickens, swept the floors, and washed the dishes. She moved through her chores mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Mrs. Carver watched her with suspicious eyes, clearly sensing something different about her, but said nothing. At 11 o'clock, Violet made her decision. She walked to the shed and gathered her few possessions. A change of clothes, her mother's Bible, a photograph of her parents, and the small wooden horse her father had carved for her when she was 8. Everything fit in a cloth sack no bigger than a loaf of bread. She walked back to the house where Mrs. Carver was preparing lunch. "Madam, I am leaving." Mrs. Carver spun around, her face flushing with anger. "What did you say?" "I am leaving," Violet repeated, her voice steadier than she felt. "I thank you for the shelter these past 6 years, but I am going now." "You ungrateful girl," Mrs. Carver hissed. "We took you in when you had nothing. We fed you and housed you, and this is how you repay us." "I worked every day for 6 years without wages or rest," Violet said quietly. "I think we are even. You walk out that door and you will starve," Mrs. Carver said. "You have nothing and no one. You will be begging to come back within a week." "Perhaps," Violet said, "but it will be my choice, and that is worth everything." She walked out the door before her courage could fail. The 3 miles to Monticello felt shorter in her new boots, even with her stitched foot protesting slightly. The sun was warm on her face, and despite her nervousness, Violet felt lighter than she had in years. Fletcher was waiting outside the trading post, his horse packed and ready. When he saw her coming down the road, his whole face transformed. The smile that spread across his features was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "You came," he said, and there was such relief and joy in his voice that Violet felt tears prick her eyes. "I came," she confirmed. Fletcher dismounted and walked to meet her, his long strides eating up the distance between them. "You have everything you need." Violet held up her small sack. "This is everything I own in the world." Fletcher took the sack gently and tied it to his saddle. "Then we will get you more, but first we need to get you fed. Silas says you look like you have not had a proper meal in months." "Silas talks too much," Violet said, but she was smiling. They ate lunch at the trading post, thick sandwiches of bread and venison that Silas put together. Violet tried not to eat too quickly, but she was hungrier than she had realized, and Fletcher watched her with satisfaction. "Better," he said when she had finished. "Now we have a long ride ahead of us. The cabin is a full day's journey into the mountains. We will camp tonight and arrive tomorrow afternoon. That all right with you?" "I have never camped before," Violet admitted. Fletcher's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Then you are in for an education. Come on." He helped her onto his horse, settling her in front of him the same way he had the previous evening, and they rode out of Monticello heading northeast toward the La Salle Mountains. The landscape gradually changed as they climbed, red rock giving way to pine forests, the air growing cooler and cleaner. Fletcher pointed out landmarks as they rode, telling her the names of plants and animals, teaching her to read the land. Violet listened intently, fascinated by his knowledge and the easy way he moved through this wild country. It was clear the mountains were his home in a way civilization had never been. They stopped at a clear stream in late afternoon, and Fletcher helped Violet down. "We will make camp here," he said. "Good water, sheltered spot, plenty of firewood." He moved with practiced efficiency, unsaddling his horse and hobbling it to graze, gathering stones to make a fire ring, collecting dry wood. Violet watched, feeling useless, until Fletcher gently put her to work gathering smaller kindling and pine needles for tinder. As the sun set behind the mountains, Fletcher built a fire and set about making dinner. He had packed supplies: coffee, beans, bacon, and flour for pan bread. The smell of cooking food made Violet's mouth water, and when Fletcher handed her a tin plate loaded with food, she could have cried at the simple abundance of it. They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. Above, the stars were coming out in numbers Violet had never imagined possible. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, and she stared up at it in wonder. "Beautiful, is it not?" Fletcher said softly. "I have never seen so many stars. No lamp light up here to drown them out, just you and the sky." Fletcher poured more coffee into her cup. "How is your foot feeling?" "Sore, but manageable. The boots help tremendously. We will check the stitches tomorrow and make sure everything is healing clean." Fletcher hesitated, then said, "Violet, I want to make something clear. When we get to the cabin, you will have your own space. I have a loft where I sleep. You can have the main room by the fireplace. I will not touch you or expect anything from you beyond simple human companionship. You are safe with me. Do you believe that?" Violet looked at him across the fire, at his honest face and steady eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "I believe you." Fletcher nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now you should get some rest. We have a long ride tomorrow." He had set out blankets for her near the fire, and Violet lay down fully clothed, her new boots still on her feet. The ground was harder than her pallet had been, but the stars above and the sound of the stream nearby and the knowledge that she had chosen this made it feel like the most comfortable bed in the world. She woke once in the deep night to find Fletcher sitting up, keeping watch. "Sleep," he said quietly when he saw her eyes open. "I have you. Nothing will harm you while I am here." The promise in those words settled over her like a blanket, and Violet slept deeply until dawn. They rode through country that grew steadily more rugged and beautiful. Fletcher's cabin sat in a high meadow surrounded by towering pines, with a view of peaks that still held snow on their summits despite the summer heat. It was exactly as he had described: solid log walls, a stone chimney, a small porch where someone could sit and watch the sun set. "It is wonderful," Violet breathed. Fletcher looked pleased. "It is home. Come on, let me show you inside." The interior was simple but well made. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall with hooks for cooking and a small oven built into the stonework. There was a sturdy table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with provisions, and a comfortable area with blankets and furs near the hearth. A ladder led up to the loft where Fletcher slept. "It is clean and warm and safe," Fletcher said. "And it is yours too now, for as long as you want to stay." Violet set down her small sack and turned to face him. "Why are you doing this, truly? I am a stranger who has nothing to offer you." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "Because when I saw you yesterday, walking on bleeding feet to serve people who do not value you, something in me recognized something in you. We are both alone in the world, Violet. Both of us have lost the people we loved. Both of us have survived when it would have been easier to give up. And I thought maybe we do not have to be alone anymore. Maybe we could be alone together if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense," Violet whispered. "I am not asking for anything romantic," Fletcher continued. "I know we just met." but I would like to get to know you, and I would like you to get to know me. Maybe we become friends. Maybe we become more. Or maybe after a few months you decide mountain life is not for you and you want to go back to town, and that is fine too. I just want you to have the chance to figure out what you want without pressure or obligation." Violet felt her eyes fill with tears. "No one has ever been this kind to me." Fletcher crossed the room and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his calloused thumbs. "Then people have been fools. You deserve kindness, Violet Jennings. You deserve care and respect and a place where you can heal. Let me give you that." "Yes," Violet said. "Yes, I want that." The first weeks in the mountain cabin passed in a rhythm that felt almost dreamlike. Violet woke each morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of Fletcher moving quietly around the cabin, trying not to wake her. He would check her foot every few days, carefully cleaning the wound and ensuring it was healing properly. After 10 days, he removed the stitches with the same gentle hands that had placed them, and Violet was relieved to see the wound had closed cleanly. Fletcher taught her the rhythms of mountain life, how to read the weather in the behavior of animals and the feel of the wind, how to identify edible plants and berries, how to fish in the cold streams, and how to preserve meat for winter. He was patient with her ignorance and generous with his knowledge, and Violet soaked it all in like parched earth drinking rain. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk. Fletcher told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his parents and his 3 brothers, about the war and the things he had seen that still sometimes woke him at night. Violet told him about her love of reading, about the stories her mother used to tell, about her dreams of one day seeing the ocean. "Maybe we could go see it," Fletcher said one evening. "When winter comes and trapping is slow, we could take a trip west to California." The casual inclusion of her in his future plans made Violet's heart skip. Fletcher looked at her, his brown eyes warm in the fading light. "I hope by winter you will still want to be here, with me." "I cannot imagine wanting to be anywhere else," Violet said honestly. As summer deepened, Violet found herself watching Fletcher with increasing awareness. She noticed the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt when he chopped wood, the concentration on his face when he worked leather, the gentleness in his hands when he handled injured animals. She noticed the way he looked at her too, his gaze lingering sometimes before he caught himself and looked away. One afternoon in late August, Fletcher was teaching her to shoot his rifle. They were in the meadow behind the cabin, and he stood behind her, his arms coming around to help her hold the heavy weapon steady. "Breathe in," he said, his voice low near her ear. "Exhale slowly and squeeze the trigger as you release the breath." Violet tried to focus on the target, but she was intensely aware of Fletcher's body pressed against her back, his warmth and strength surrounding her. She squeezed the trigger and the rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The shot went wide, missing the target completely. "Good try," Fletcher said. "Let us go again." They practiced until Violet could hit the target more often than not, and when Fletcher finally stepped back, she felt the loss of his presence like a physical ache. That night, as they sat by the fire after supper, Fletcher said, "I need to go down to Monticello in a few days, trade some pelts, get supplies for winter. I will be gone 2, maybe 3 days. Violet felt a flutter of alarm. "Should I come with you? Do you want to? I do not know. Part of me wants to stay here where it is safe and peaceful, but part of me does not want to be apart from you." The words hung in the air between them. Fletcher set down the piece of leather he had been working and turned to face her fully. "Violet," he said carefully, "I need to know something. These past weeks, have they been as important to you as they have been to me?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere between making you boots and teaching you to fish, I went and fell in love with you." Fletcher's voice was rough with emotion. I tried not to. I told myself it was too soon, that you needed time to heal and find yourself. But I wake up every morning grateful that you are here. I go to sleep every night thankful that I found you. And I think about you constantly, about your laugh and your kindness and the way you see beauty in everything. Violet's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Fletcher, you do not have to say anything, Fletcher continued. If you do not feel the same way, I will not push. We can keep things as they are, friends sharing a cabin, but I needed you to know the truth. I love you, Violet Jennings. I think I loved you from the moment I saw you bleeding in the dust and refusing to complain about it. I feel the same way, Violet said, her voice shaking. I have felt it for weeks, but I was afraid to say anything. Afraid you would think I was only grateful for the rescue or that I was too damaged to be worth loving. But Fletcher, what I feel for you is so much more than gratitude. You make me feel safe and valued and seen. You make me laugh. You make me want to be brave. I love you too. Fletcher stood up and crossed to where Violet sat, pulling her gently to her feet. His hands framed her face, and he looked at her with such tenderness that it took her breath away. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Please," Violet whispered. Fletcher's kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But when Violet pressed closer, her hands clutching his shoulders, the kiss deepened. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and Violet felt like she was finally, truly home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "Come to Monticello with me," he said. "And while we are there, marry me. I want you as my wife, Violet. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Violet said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Fletcher, I will marry you." They left for Monticello 3 days later, riding together on Fletcher's horse, just as they had that first journey. But everything was different now. Violet sat in front of Fletcher with his arms around her, and she leaned back against his chest with complete trust and contentment. They stopped at the trading post first, where Silas took one look at them and grinned. "Well, I will be damned. Took you too long enough to figure it out. We need to find a preacher," Fletcher said. "You know anyone who can marry us?" Reverend Thompson just came through last week on his circuit. He is staying at the boarding house for another few days before he moves on. I reckon he could marry you today if you want. Fletcher looked at Violet. Today, Violet confirmed. Reverend Thompson was a kindly old man with white hair and laugh lines around his eyes. He agreed to perform the ceremony that afternoon in the small church that Monticello used for Sunday services. Silas and his wife stood as witnesses, and Violet wished desperately that her parents could be there to see her marry this good, strong man who loved her. She had no wedding dress, but she wore her cleanest dress, and Fletcher had bought her a small bouquet of wildflowers from a woman selling them in town. Fletcher wore his best shirt and had trimmed his hair slightly, though it still hung past his collar in the way Violet loved. The ceremony was simple. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they lived. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife and told Fletcher he could kiss his bride, the kiss was sweet and tender and full of promise. That night, Fletcher rented a room at the boarding house. It was the first time Violet had slept in a real bed in years, and the first time she had ever shared a bed with a man. Fletcher was gentle and patient, taking his time to explore and learn what made her sigh with pleasure. Violet had been nervous, but Fletcher's love and care made it beautiful, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterwards, Fletcher held her close, his large hand stroking her hair. "I love you, Mrs. Townsend." "I love you too," Violet murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "Thank you for finding me." "Thank you for letting yourself be found," Fletcher said, and kissed her forehead gently. They returned to the mountain cabin as husband and wife, and the months that followed were the happiest of Violet's life. Fletcher taught her to hunt and trap, and she proved to have a good eye and steady hands. She learned to tan hides and make her own clothes, to preserve food for the long winter, to navigate the mountain trails without getting lost. Winter came early that year, heavy snows blanketing the high country by early November. But inside the cabin, with a good fire and plenty of supplies, Violet felt nothing but contentment. She and Fletcher spent long evenings reading aloud from the small collection of books they had, or working on projects by firelight, or simply talking about everything and nothing. On the coldest nights, they would lie together in the loft that had become their bedroom, wrapped in furs and quilts, listening to the wind howl outside while they kept each other warm. In February, Violet realized she was pregnant. She told Fletcher one snowy evening, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Violet asked, though the answer was obvious. "I am happier than I thought it was possible to be," Fletcher said, setting her down gently and placing his hand over her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything, Violet. A home, a purpose, love. And now a child. I do not have words for what I am feeling." "You do not need words," Violet said, taking his hand. "I can see it in your eyes." Fletcher became impossibly protective as Violet's pregnancy progressed. He would barely let her lift anything heavy, and he worried constantly about her health and comfort. Violet found it endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood it came from love. When the baby came in early October of 1879, it was a long and difficult labor that left Fletcher pacing the cabin in terror while the midwife they had brought up from Monticello worked with Violet. But when he finally heard the strong cry of his newborn son, Fletcher burst into the room with tears streaming down his face. "A boy," the midwife said, placing the baby in Violet's arms, "healthy and strong." Fletcher knelt beside the bed, looking at his wife and son with awe. The baby had Violet's fair coloring and Fletcher's strong features, and he waved his tiny fists with determination. "What should we name him?" Violet asked. "James," Fletcher said immediately. "After my father, James Townsend." "James," Violet repeated, smiling down at her son. "Hello, little James. Welcome to the world." Fletcher reached out a tentative finger and baby James immediately grabbed hold of it with surprising strength. Fletcher laughed, a sound of pure wonder. "Look at that grip. He's going to be strong like his mother." "Like his father," Violet corrected gently. "No, like his mother," Fletcher insisted. "The strongest person I know." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. James grew into a sturdy boy with his father's adventurous spirit and his mother's thoughtful nature. When he was 3, Violet gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Emma, who kept the cabin in a constant state of happy chaos. Fletcher proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching his children to love the mountains the way he did. He made tiny boots for James when the boy was big enough to walk the trails. Remembering the boots he had made for Violet all those years ago, Violet had found her calling in healing. She learned about medicinal plants from an old Ute woman they befriended, and word spread that Fletcher Townsend's wife could treat injuries and illnesses with remarkable skill. People began making the long journey to their cabin seeking help, and Violet never turned anyone away. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher surprised Violet with a trip to California. They left the children with Silas and his wife, and traveled west to see the ocean Violet had dreamed about as a girl. When Violet stood on the beach for the first time, feeling the sand between her toes and the spray of salt water on her face, she cried. Fletcher wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Is it everything you hoped?" he asked. "It is more," Violet said. "But Fletcher, I cannot wait to get back to the mountains, back home." Fletcher turned her in his arms to face him. "You have changed since the day I met you, that frightened, hurting girl in the dust. You gave me the space to become who I was meant to be," Violet said. "You gave me love without conditions, safety without obligations. You let me heal and grow and find my strength." "You always had that strength," Fletcher said. "I just made you a pair of boots so you could walk your own path." "And you walked beside me," Violet said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "You have walked beside me always." "And I always will," Fletcher promised. They returned to their mountain home, to their children and their life, and the years continued to unfold in a tapestry of simple joys and deep love. Fletcher taught James and the twins to hunt and fish, to read the weather and respect the land. Violet taught them to read and write, to heal and help others, to see the beauty in all things. James grew tall and strong like his father, eventually building his own cabin in a nearby meadow when he married a girl from Monticello. The twins married brothers from a ranching family and moved to a valley 2 days' ride away, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to have their own lives. As Fletcher and Violet grew older, their love only deepened. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, his arm around her shoulders, watching sunsets paint the peaks in shades of gold and rose. "You ever regret it?" Fletcher asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "Leaving civilization behind to live in these mountains with a rough mountain man." Violet looked at him with eyes still the color of mountain sage, though now surrounded by laugh lines and crow's feet. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything that mattered, Fletcher. You gave me boots when I had none, a home when I was lost, love when I had forgotten what it felt like. You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "You did the same for me," Fletcher said, his voice rough with emotion even after all these years. "I was so alone before you came. I did not even know how alone until I found you." "We found each other," Violet corrected, "and we built this beautiful life together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The same stars that had witnessed their first night together all those years ago. "I love you, Violet Townsend," Fletcher said. "I love you too, Fletcher Townsend, always and forever." Fletcher passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, in the cabin he had built with his own hands with Violet holding his hand. Violet mourned him deeply, but she did not leave the mountains. This was home, filled with memories of their life together. She lived another 8 years, during which time she became a grandmother many times over. Her children and grandchildren visited often, bringing laughter and life to the cabin. She taught them the skills Fletcher had taught her, passing down his knowledge and wisdom. On a clear autumn day, very much like the one when she had first arrived at the cabin so many years ago, Violet sat on the porch looking at the mountains. She was 80 years old, her hair white as snow, her hands gnarled with arthritis. But she wore the boots Fletcher had made her, carefully maintained and repaired over the decades, still protecting her feet as they had from that very first day. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, and heard Fletcher's voice as clearly as if he stood beside her. "Ready to see what comes next?" "Ready," Violet whispered. "Walk with me." "Always," came the answer, as certain as the mountains. Violet Jennings Townsend passed away that afternoon, peacefully and without pain. Her children found her on the porch, a gentle smile on her face, wearing the boots that had been the beginning of everything. They buried her next to Fletcher on a hillside overlooking the meadow, where wildflowers bloomed in summer and snow fell soft in winter. On the headstone, James carved the words his mother had requested. "Here lies Violet Jennings Townsend, beloved wife, mother, and healer. She was the woman who never owned shoes until a mountain man crafted her boots and walked beside her always." The cabin stood for many more years, maintained by James and his children and his children's children. It became a place of pilgrimage for those who knew the story, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that kindness could change everything, and that sometimes the greatest adventures began with a simple act of compassion. And in the meadow where Fletcher and Violet had built their life together, where they had raised their children and grown old side by side, wildflowers continued to bloom every summer in shades of purple and gold and blue, a living memorial to a love story that had begun with bleeding feet and a pair of handmade boots, and had grown into something eternal. Their great-great-grandchildren still tell the story, gathered around fires on cold winter nights. They tell about the mountain man with gentle hands and the woman who had forgotten what kindness felt like. They tell about boots made with love and a life built on mutual respect and deep affection. They tell about Fletcher and Violet, who found each other when they both needed it most, and who proved that true love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but about showing up for each other, day after day, walking side by side through whatever comes. And somewhere in those mountains, if you listen carefully on quiet evenings when the wind sighs through the pines, you can almost hear them still. The steady rhythm of two sets of footsteps, walking together through eternity, the way they always had and always would. The legacy Fletcher and Violet left behind was not just in their children and grandchildren, though that family tree grew strong and wide. It was in the lesson they taught anyone who knew their story, that we all deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. That sometimes the broken places in our lives are where the most beautiful things begin. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. Violet had walked into that trading post on bleeding feet, carrying nothing but pain and endurance. She had walked away in boots made by loving hands, carrying hope and possibility. And in between those two moments, everything had changed, because Fletcher had seen her not as she was in that moment of desperation, but as she could be given the chance to heal and grow. And Violet had seen him not as a solitary mountain man who needed nothing and no one, but as a person capable of great love who simply needed someone worthy of it. They had saved each other, really. Not in any dramatic fashion, but in the quiet, daily ways that matter most. He had given her shelter and safety and respect. She had given him purpose and companionship and joy. Together, they had built something that lasted beyond their own lifetimes, a love story written in the very landscape they had called home. The boots, carefully preserved by the family, eventually found their way into a small museum in Monticello. They sit in a glass case now, worn and repaired but still sturdy, still beautiful in their simplicity. A small placard tells the story of their creation, of the mountain man who made them and the woman who wore them for 50 years. People come from far away to see them sometimes, these humble boots that represent so much. They represent kindness and skill and the power of small gestures. They represent a moment of connection that changed two lives completely. They represent the truth that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, between the most unlikely people, if we are brave enough to reach out and take the hand that is offered. And if the ghosts of Fletcher and Violet do indeed still walk those mountain paths, then surely they walk hand in hand, her feet still protected by the boots he made, his presence still the steady strength beside her that it always was. Two souls who found each other across the dust and distance, who chose each other day after day, who built a life of simple beauty in the high country. They were not famous. They did not change history or achieve great recognition. But they loved each other well and true, and they raised their children with kindness, and they helped everyone who came to them in need. And in the end, what legacy could be more important than that? So the story endures, passed down through generations, a testament to the transformative power of love and compassion. It reminds us that we never know when our lives might intersect with someone who will change everything, that a moment of kindness can ripple outward in ways we cannot imagine, that we all have the power to make someone's burden lighter, to craft them boots when they have none, to walk beside them when they are alone. Fletcher and Violet's story is ultimately a simple one when you strip away all the details. It is the story of two lonely people who found each other, who chose compassion over indifference, who built something lasting from the raw materials of honesty and respect and genuine care. It is the story of boots made for bleeding feet and a heart open enough to receive them, of mountain trails walked together and burdens shared, of children raised and grandchildren loved, of a lifetime measured not in wealth or status but in the steady accumulation of good days, hard work, and deep affection. It is the story of she was the woman who never owned shoes, and he was the mountain man who crafted her boots and walked beside her always. And it is a story that, in its essence, continues to resonate because we all long for that kind of love. The kind that sees us truly, that meets us where we are, that gives without demanding, that stays without wavering. The kind that makes us boots when we need them and walks with us down whatever path we choose. Fletcher and Violet found that love in each other, against all odds, in the wild beauty of the Utah Mountains. And though they are long gone now, their story lives on, a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever walked on bleeding feet, for anyone who has ever felt unseen, for anyone who has ever wondered if love might still be possible. The answer, their story whispers across the years, is always yes. Love is always possible. Healing is always possible. New beginnings are always possible. Sometimes all it takes is the willingness to accept help, the courage to offer it, and the wisdom to recognize when two paths were meant to converge. This is the story of Fletcher and Violet, mountain man and the woman without shoes, and how they found in each other everything they had been missing. It is a story of the American West, of hard lives lived with grace, of love found in unexpected places. It is a story that deserves to be told and retold, remembered and honored, because it reminds us of the best of what we can be to each other. And somewhere in those mountains still, if you believe in such things, they walk on together. His arm steady at her back, her hand warm in his. Both of them wearing boots he made with his own capable hands. Both of them finally, eternally home,